Let's do this. Stretch your arms out as far as you can. From the tip of your right middle finger to the tip of your left, that is the entire 4.5 billion year history of Earth. Your right arm is a hellscape of molten lava. Your torso, a couple billion years of microscopic slime. Animals don't even show up until your left wrist. The dinosaurs arrive here. And all of human history fits here, on the very tip of your left middle fingernail. Yeah, Earth is old, and humans haven't been around that long. To put it in perspective, we're taking you back in time to the very beginning of Earth's existence, all the way to you right here. Around 4.5 billion years ago, the lights went on. That's our sun undergoing nuclear fusion. And in the midst of that gigantic cloud of dust and gas surrounding it was a big clump of rock and metal that gravity drew together into a planetesimal, which just means a planet that's not fully baked yet. Well, that's Earth. Soon, gravity pulled it into a sphere of molten lava. The heavy elements like iron and gold sank to the center and formed the Earth's inner core. That core is important because it created Earth's magnetic field, and the magnetic field shielded future life from all the sun's solar wind. But it didn't shield it from this. Just after the formation of the solar system, when Earth was still a glowing magma ball, a Mars-sized planet named Theia plowed into our future home. It hit it with enough force to knock the planet off its axis and blast a moon-sized ball of magma into orbit, which created, well, our moon. This was a violent time. Asteroids and comets smashed into our cooling planet on the regular. But they didn't just smash, they delivered water. Finally, Earth cooled off and developed a nice rocky crust, kind of like on that sourdough that you bake. We all got into bread during the pandemic. When the surface temperature dropped below the boiling point, it was cool enough on early Earth for water to condense and create the very first oceans. And that's when something wild happened. About 4 billion years ago, deep underwater near hydrothermal vents, conditions for life began to form. You see, these underwater vents were rich with energy and minerals, including the 6 crucial elements for life, which are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and phosphorus. In these unique settings, those 6 crucial elements could react with nearby ingredients like hydrogen cyanide and hydrogen sulfide to create the precursors to amino acids, lipids, and even RNA. Yeah, the beginning of life wasn't a cosmic spark. It was a series of chemical reactions. Chemical reactions that created an extremely complicated biomolecule. A biomolecule that did extremely complicated things, like make more of itself. And once it started, around 4 billion years ago, that chemistry was impossible to stop. 2.7 billion years ago, Earth's interior was hot. I mean, really hot. Much hotter than the ground beneath your feet today. All that intense internal heat was fueling a world of ancient volcanic islands. Down at the bottom of the ocean, that same heat was forcing mineral-rich water through massive cracks in the seafloor, literally injecting gold into the crust. This is how the planet forged the massive gold deposits we now find in Canada and Western Australia. The original gold from back when Earth was forming sank to the core, but later, asteroid special delivery restocked the surface, and those 2.7 billion year old volcanoes concentrated those space metals into the veins that we mine today. Okay, now let's fast forward for a minute all the way to about 30 million years ago. Earth wasn't just cracking anymore, it was exploding. In Nevada, supervolcanoes regularly exploded billions of tons of lava and ash across the landscape. One in particular, called the Atlantic caldera, blew its top and then collapsed in on itself. Well, that collapse shattered the ground and created the perfect network of pathways for gold-rich fluids to rise out of the magma and settle right near the surface. Yeah, this dramatic geological event brought gold to the surface. Now let's rewind back in time to witness Earth's first mass extinction event that nearly wiped out everything. But it didn't start with an asteroid. It started with cyanobacteria. While volcanoes were rupturing Earth's surface, life on early Earth was getting a head start. Okay, back at your right bicep, we had Luca, the single-celled, great times infinity grandparent of every cactus, shark, and human on Earth. Its last universal common ancestor, LUCA. But by 2.7 billion years ago, Luca's descendants, cyanobacteria, were taking over. Earth's oceans were covered with these microbes, and they did something special, something that almost ended life on Earth at that time. They started photosynthesis. Cyanobacteria, for the first time in Earth's history, made oxygen from carbon dioxide. This changed the world. Up until this point, somewhere around my right shoulder, the world was full of methane. Cyanobacteria, powered by this new biological tech, photosynthesis, were hugely successful, and there were a lot of them. They pumped out so much oxygen that it replaced the methane in the early atmosphere. And then it triggered the very first mass extinction, the Great Oxidation Event. Oxygen sounds great to us today, but 2.4 billion years ago, it was poisonous to all those OG anaerobic microbes. This atmospheric change from so much methane to so much oxygen wiped out most of early life on Earth. It was the very first mass extinction. The life that survived adapted to oxygen, which is really good at generating energy after breaking down nutrients. So life began to metabolize oxygen, and that was a great turn of events. Now, what's crazy about this whole timeline is we're halfway across the body, right near my heart, and we're still hundreds of millions of years from anything livelier than a kale smoothie. And life was still really tenuous for our little green cyanobacteria friends, because the change in atmosphere also changed something else. All that methane created a blanket of greenhouse gas that kept the planet nice and toasty. But then methane in the atmosphere decreased, triggering one of the first ice ages on Earth. For a couple 100 million years, Earth became a snowball. Yeah, Earth's climate has changed, but what didn't change is the constant threat from asteroids. Yeah, about 2 billion years ago, our planet was hit by a massive asteroid in what is now South Africa. That was the Vredefort impact. The asteroid that caused this impact was 20 kilometers wide. That's double the size of the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. This asteroid hit with so much force, it folded the Earth's crust back on itself. This buried a massive gold field in South Africa, saving one of the world's largest gold deposits for us to find today. Yeah, dinosaurs were lucky not to exist 2 billion years ago. For photosynthetic creatures, this impact was brutal. But at the same time, it was kind of great for Earth. The impact of the Vredefort released dust and carbon dioxide into the air, and that may have helped Earth finally get out of its snowball phase. Around this time, Earth was one big supercontinent called Columbia, also known as Nuna. It was the first time almost all of Earth's continental crust was stitched together into one giant island. But this first supercontinent was about half the size of the final boss of all supercontinents, Pangaea. Columbia was a little smaller, stretching 12,900 kilometers from north to south. Now, even though there was oxygen in the air, you couldn't stand on Columbia's beaches without a spacesuit. That's because the protective ozone layer wouldn't form for another billion years. You'd be fried by UV radiation. But underwater, archaea microbes were hard at work. They were evolving, becoming more complex, and developing intricate relationships with other single-celled microbes. Eventually, one cell couldn't do without the other. Big cells swallowed small ones, forming cellular powerhouses known as mitochondria. These little things literally powered cells, taking in nutrients as fuel and cranking out the energy that kept and still keeps everything running. Eventually, all this microbial mingling led to the rise of organisms called eukaryotes. You see, a simple bacterium is like a studio apartment where things like DNA, proteins, and waste are all floating around in the same space. A eukaryote is like a luxury mansion with lots of rooms. In scientific terms, eukaryotes are organisms whose cells contain a nucleus and other specialized parts called organelles, all wrapped up in their own little membranes. You can remember them because it means you, as in you, a complicated multicellular creature. You are a eukaryote. But to start, they were really just way more complicated single-cell microbes. Somewhere in the next 500 million years, or most of my upper left arm, those complicated eukaryotic cells with all kinds of internal structures became multicellular. Complex life was finding a way. Ever since the first supercontinent, Columbia, Earth has been figuring out how to best place its land. 1.5 billion years ago, Columbia broke apart, and around 1 billion years ago, Earth came up with another supercontinent, Rodinia. This was a massive and barren supercontinent. Back then, plants still hadn't evolved to turn the land green. Rodinia was so large and sat so squarely across the equator that it blocked warm ocean currents from reaching the poles. By the time we hit my left bicep, that's about 750 million years ago. Rodinia started breaking apart. And when it did, it rained a lot on Earth. It rained so much that it actually decreased the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and caused the next snowball Earth era. But as the ice melted, life went into overdrive. Deep in the oceans, eukaryotes evolved into complex seaweeds and sponges. We aren't quite at the land plants or animals with bones stage yet, but somewhere right around my left wrist, life absolutely took off in an event called the Cambrian explosion. 530 million years ago, you were officially in the Paleozoic era, specifically the Cambrian period. Under the glittering Cambrian Sea, marine animals evolved hard. It was the time of mollusks, starfish, arthropods, chordates, you name it. Suddenly, life looked fast. After billions of years represented by sea slime, so much life happened between my wrist and my fingertip. A spike in calcium levels in the ocean allowed organisms to grow shells and skeletons. Well, that kicked off an evolutionary arms race. If one creature grew a shell, well, the next grew teeth. And to defend against teeth, the next creature grew armor. Meanwhile, the supercontinent Gondwana formed, which caused some problems for all those new branches of life. Around 444 million years ago, midway down my left forearm, Gondwana decided to take a slow-motion trip to the bottom of the world, right over the South Pole. This triggered a massive planet-wide deep freeze. The bad news is that massive freeze formed massive glaciers from water, because almost all life back then was still hanging out in the shallow seas. This was a bad turn of events. As the ice grew, the sea levels dropped. For marine life, no water meant no home, and no home meant the Ordovician extinction. This event wiped out 85% of all species on Earth. If you were a trilobite swimming around back then, well, your odds of survival were essentially zero. Once it warmed up, though, the kind of life we know and love began to develop. Fish, plants everywhere. And the kind of life we'd never want to meet, like armored, giant-jawed placoderms. 375 million years ago, just inches away from my wrist, something incredible happened. The creature Tiktaalik dragged itself out of the water, becoming the first creature to walk on land. To a fish, going on land wasn't an adventure to the unknown, it was a refuge from the giant armored predators in the water. And they walked around the first true forests with real trees. Not long after, well, geologically speaking, the supercontinent Pangaea formed, around 335 million years ago. This was the era where almost every piece of dry land on the planet mashed together into one giant C-shaped megacontinent. Pangaea was a world of extremes, from a lush coastal paradise to a massive, scorching desert in the center, all surrounded by a single, terrifyingly vast ocean called Panthalassa. This wasn't just a barren rock anymore. It was home to giant insects, odd in-betweeny creatures like the Gorgonopsids, and eventually the very first dinosaurs. But unfortunately for them, the Great Dying was just around the corner. The Great Dying was a near total reboot of the planet. Around 252 million years ago, right around the base of my hand, Earth went through the Permian-Triassic extinction, and it was deadly. A massive volcanic complex called the Siberian Traps erupted for 1 million years and pumped so much carbon dioxide into the air that the oceans turned acidic. It was so bad that 96% of all marine species and 70% of land animals vanished. This was the closest life on Earth came to being wiped out. Okay, we've reached the base of my fingers, and this was roughly the time the dinosaurs showed up. Around 175 million years ago, Pangaea started to crack. And it was a messy, million-year breakup that split the world into two massive sub-supercontinents. As the Atlantic Ocean began to unzip between them, the world's climate shifted, turning the dry interior of the old supercontinent into a lush tropical paradise. This world was the ultimate all-you-can-eat buffet for the stars of the show, the dinosaurs. With more plants to eat and plenty of room to roam, herbivores like the long-necked sauropods went through a massive growth spurt. We're talking creatures that grew to the size of 4-story buildings. They were so heavy that the ground literally shook with every step. These animal skyscrapers dominated the landscape of a planet that, after billions of years, was finally beginning to look like the home we recognize today. Okay, by the time we hit my first knuckle, about 145 million years ago, the planet was in the middle of its most iconic makeover. The continents had drifted into a messy, recognizable version of the map we have today. But there was one huge catch. Because the climate was so steaming hot and had zero polar ice caps, sea levels were at an all-time high, nearly 200 meters higher than they are right now. It was a planet of giant islands and lush tropical archipelagos, the golden age of the Cretaceous. And dinosaurs like the T-Rex and Triceratops absolutely ruled the planet. But the clock starts ticking on the most famous bad day in geological history. Just 66 million years ago, while the dinosaurs were busy dominating every corner of the globe, a 10-kilometer wide asteroid was lining up its sights with the Yucatan Peninsula. In a literal flash, 160 million years of reptilian rule ended in a boom. The aftermath of this cosmic impactor wiped out 75% of all species. Think full nuclear Armageddon followed by nuclear winter. No land animal larger than 25 kilograms survived. But we did, or rather our shrew-like mammal ancestors did. Thanks, little buddy. And with the dinos out of the picture, mammals took off in all directions, quickly filling all the ecological niches their former dino overlords had occupied. Within 30 million years, those crafty little mammals evolved into bats, herbivores, and carnivores. Okay, by the time we hit my last knuckle, modern mammals had appeared. Even seemingly complicated mammals like toothed whales and baleen whales had already evolved to dominate the sea. By the time we get to my fingernail, the earliest known humans set foot on Earth. And by set foot, I mean the smallish species Sahelanthropus literally got up off all fours and started occasionally walking around upright on two legs. You know, like my cat sometimes does when there's a fly. Within a couple million years, early hominids like Lucy, the Australopithecus, walked around upright full-time. 800,000 years ago, the first humans discovered how to control fire. And it was lit. They could cook and keep warm. 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens became the last surviving humans. And about 5,500 years ago, right at the very tip of my fingernail, this was the time when human civilization began. Nearly 4.5 billion years after Earth formed, an organism evolved that was able to read and write and start asking big questions about how they got there. And we're still here, asking questions, trying to figure it all out. It's been a wild ride. If you ever wondered what it would be like to live and die in some of these prehistoric eras, well, it would be pretty brutal. Seriously, we sent Digipeter to check it out, and he didn't quite survive. But that's a story for another What If.